They said your silence was proof you'd lost. They mistook stillness for surrender. But the truth is, that was the moment everything inside you shifted. The night it all fell apart, when the people you trusted most showed their teeth, when laughter echoed from the ones who swore loyalty, something ancient stirred beneath your calm. You remember the sting of humiliation, the way your chest tightened as if the world itself had turned against you. They didn't just walk away, they watched to see if you'd crawl. And maybe you did for a while. The floor became familiar, the darkness intimate. You learned to breathe beneath the weight of disappointment, to wear pain like armor. Because once you've lost everything, the game can no longer break you. There was a moment, a single breath, where you saw it all differently. Failure wasn't destruction, it was exposure. It stripped you clean of illusions, burned away the weak layers until only the truth remained. You were not broken, you were revealed. Every fake smile, every handshake, every "I've got your back," all of it melted into clarity. And clarity, though it hurts, is power. It was never about their betrayal, it was about your awakening. You stood there in the ruins, and instead of begging the universe for answers, you stared back at it. And for the first time, it blinked. The old version of you would have chased validation, tried to prove worth, tried to fix what was never meant to be whole. But now your emotions sharpened into blades. You became your own observer, detached yet aware. They laughed at your silence, but silence is where strategy grows. The battlefield shifted from words to patience, from ego to endurance. You stopped explaining, you stopped defending. You learned that the most dangerous person is the one who listens, remembers, and moves in silence. Every insult became fuel, every doubt a map, every scar a language only you could now read. And though no one saw it, you began to rebuild, not out of hope, but out of necessity. Power no longer meant control over others, it meant control over yourself. You realized that survival was an art form. That strength wasn't in how loud you roared, but how long you endured without applause. The world sees victory as noise, but real triumph happens in the quiet, in the moments when you keep going despite no one watching. Now they whisper again, not in mockery, but confusion. They sense something changed but can't name it. You don't rise the same way you fell. There's calculation in your calm, precision in your movements. You've become untouchable, not because you fought back, but because you stopped needing to. They played a game of attention. You mastered the art of indifferent. You lost everything they could take, and that's when they lost their power. They left you when you were most human, when your hands trembled, when your voice cracked, when your dreams began bleeding through the seams. The same ones who once clapped for you at your peak now watched in silence as you fell, entertained by the collapse. Every echo of laughter, every message left unanswered carved another mark inside your chest. Nights became longer. You stopped talking because every word felt like a confession. The air grew heavy, not from sadness, but from the realization that no one was coming to save you. That's when the light inside you dimmed. Not gone, just buried, waiting. You walk through days like a ghost wearing your own skin. Faces blur, voices fade. The world feels like an empty theater where you're still performing a role no one's watching. You begin to see people differently, not as friends but as patterns. Smiles become masks, promises become traps. You start noticing how quickly loyalty dies when power disappears. The way admiration turns into disgust once you stop feeding it. That's when the darkness starts whispering. It doesn't tempt you with destruction. It seduces you with clarity. It tells you the truth. That pain is the most honest thing you'll ever feel. In the quiet, something ancient stirs. The part of you that used to believe in fairness begins to rot, replaced by something sharper. You stop asking why it happened. You start observing, calculating, studying. The weakness they mocked becomes data. The heartbreak becomes code. You become your own experiment in resilience. Every rejection becomes a lesson in power. Every insult a seed of strategy. The pain no longer hurts, it instructs. You start realizing that solitude isn't punishment, it's preparation. The battlefield isn't out there anymore. It's inside your mind, and you're learning to fight differently now. The nights turn colder, but you stop flinching. You sit in silence long enough to hear your own thoughts aligning like soldiers. You remember the faces that betrayed you, not with hatred but precision. You no longer seek revenge. You study their nature, the psychology of envy, the anatomy of weakness. You understand now that people don't hate you because you failed. They hate you because your failure reminds them of their own fragility. So you vanish, you move in silence. You begin rebuilding, not with applause, but with intent. Every step forward becomes an act of defiance they'll never see coming. And somewhere in that isolation, you evolve. The old version of you, desperate, knave, loud, dissolves. In its place stands something colder, quieter, infinitely more dangerous. You learn that power doesn't scream, it watches. That strength doesn't beg, it waits. You stop wanting validation because you finally understand the same crowd that cheered for your rise was secretly praying for your fall. Now, when you look in the mirror, you don't see pain anymore. You see armor. You see control. You see someone who survived the silence and learned to weaponize. And though no one knows it yet, this is the chapter where the real game begins. It doesn't happen all at once. The shift comes quietly, between breaths, between the ache and the silence after it. You wake one morning and the world feels heavier, but your chest doesn't cave under it anymore. You stop waiting for rescue. You stop replaying the betrayal. The voices that once mattered, their laughter, their judgment, their lies, fade into static. The mirror becomes your only witness. The person staring back is no longer pleading. There's a new calm there, a dangerous kind. The kind that comes when pain no longer controls you, when you realize the only person left to fear is you. You start moving differently, not with desperation but precision, each step deliberate, each silence louder than a scream. You no longer crave to be understood. You've seen what happens when you hand people the map to your soul. They use it to burn your home. So now you speak less, you build more. The anger that once consumed you becomes fuel. Every scar becomes a symbol, carved not by weakness but by initiation. You are no longer the victim of the storm. You are learning to command it. The same chaos that drowned you now obeys your rhythm. They'll never understand how you kept walking after they buried you. They think you disappeared, but that was the plan. You needed the solitude, the crucible where the old version of you could die without witnesses. Pain was the fire, discipline was the blade. Together, they sculpted something unrecognizable. You began to crave the grind, the structure, the repetition. Each small act of consistency was a secret rebellion against everything that tried to break you. And as the world slept, you rose, not as a savior, not as a hero, but as something colder, sharper, unshakable. There's an ancient law the powerful live by: never reveal transformation until it's complete. So, you vanish into routine. You master the art of restraint. You say nothing when they mock. You react to nothing when they provoke. You let their noise fill the air while you work in shadows and silence. Your revenge is mathematical. You study their habits, their weaknesses, their tells. You evolve while they stagnate. And by the time they realize the game has changed, you've already rewritten the rule. Now there's a stillness inside you that unsettles people. They can sense it, the discipline, the control, the buried fire. You don't need to prove your worth anymore. You've become the threat they once laughed at. You've mastered the art of emotional invisibility. The same mind that once trembled is now your fortress. You read people without speaking. You navigate betrayal like a strategist walking through smoke. And somewhere deep inside, you know this truth: the person who learns to master pain is untouchable. Because once you've been broken, nothing can break you again. You stand before the mirror once more. No tears, no rage, just focus. The reflection stares back like an omen, calm and terrifying. You realize it wasn't the world you needed to conquer. It was your own hesitation. And now that it's gone, the silence feels sacred. The storm outside can roar all at once. You've become the lightning. The climb begins when no one is watching. When the noise fades and the world that mocked you goes silent, you wake up in that emptiness and realize the silence isn't your enemy, it's your forge. Every morning you rebuild yourself, piece by piece, without witnesses, without mercy. You stop waiting for permission, you stop explaining your pain. You start moving in silence where power grows unseen. The same hands that once trembled now build without hesitation. The same eyes that once looked for validation now see through deception. You've been reborn not in light, but in shadow. And that's where the real transformation begins. They think the climb is about effort, about discipline. But it's not, it's about shedding your former self. The naive version of you who believed loyalty meant safety, who mistook attention for love. That version dies quietly. You bury him with every late night, every repetition, every silent rejection turned into focus. The climb is cruel because it forces you to walk alone. But in that isolation, you meet the version of yourself no one believed could exist. The strategist, the survivor, the calm within chaos. You start seeing betrayal not as pain, but as information. You start playing the game with eyes that never blink. The world doesn't understand what happens in silence. They don't see the hours you spend dissecting your failures, reprogramming your instincts, rewiring your hunger. You become surgical with your emotions, never wasting energy on outrage, never showing fear. People sense something changing in you, but they can't define it. You've become unreadable. That's power. You speak less, but every word hits harder. You move less, but every action ripples further. They can't predict you anymore, and it terrifies them. The climb has stripped you of softness. It's not cruelty, it's precision. You've learned to feel deeply, but reveal nothing. There are nights when the weight feels unbearable, when your old life whispers for you to come back. But you stay the course, because now you understand. Comfort is the enemy of transformation. You walk through storms and call them teachers. You feel your heartbeat in sync with the thunder. Every bruise becomes a sigil of your evolution. The climb isn't about reaching the top, it's about becoming the kind of person who no longer fears the fall. You move through the world like an ancient force rediscovered, silent but undeniable. And slowly, without fanfare, results appear. The body strengthens, the mind sharpens, the soul quiets. You've become unrecognizable, and it's beautiful. Those who once doubted you start asking questions they'll never get answers to. You've learned to let mystery be your weapon. You've learned to make silence speak for you. The climb changes your posture, your tone, your presence. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer fight, you command. You've mastered the art of invisible power, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't beg, doesn't need to prove. The climb has done its work. You're no longer the same, and they know it. They used to laugh when you spoke. They used to call you obsessed, dramatic, delusional. You remember those nights when silence wasn't peace. It was judgment echoing through your mind. Every mistake, every rejection replayed like a looped film you couldn't escape. You begged for understanding once. You reached for empathy. But they taught you something priceless. No one saves the one they've already buried. That's when your mind began to shift. The same wounds that used to bleed started to harden into armor. You stopped asking, "Why me?" and started whispering, "Watch me." It didn't happen in a single moment. It was gradual, almost invisible, like the sound of ice cracking under pressure before it breaks free. You started moving differently, thinking differently. You didn't announce your comeback. You became it. You learned that true evolution doesn't scream, it hums beneath the chaos. You began to understand that survival is not the absence of pain but the mastery of it. You dissected your own weakness like a surgeon, cold, methodical, precise. You started noticing patterns, people's intentions, their masks, their motives. Every betrayal became a textbook. Every failure, a cipher waiting to be decoded. You walked into rooms and felt the temperature change. They couldn't explain it, but something in your energy made them avert their gaze. The same eyes that once mocked you now hesitate to meet yours, because they feel it now, the control, the composure, the quiet violence of your calm. You don't seek revenge. You radiate inevitability. There's a new rhythm in your steps, deliberate and measured. You no longer chase recognition. You weaponize silence. They gossip. You build. They crave validation. You disappear into purpose. What they mistake for distance is actually design. You learned that the loudest in the room are often the weakest in spirit. You stopped explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You realized that power doesn't need to roar. It only needs to breathe. In that realization, something ancient awakened in you. The wolf that watched while others barked. The strategist who sees the battlefield from above, not from the mud. You became fluent in restraint. You learned the art of timing, how to let others exhaust themselves while you stand still, patient, unreadable. You became addicted to control, not chaos, to precision, not noise. Now your reflection no longer begs for mercy, it demands respect. The fear that once paralyzed you has turned into instinct. The pain that used to define you now polishes your edge. You move through the world like someone who has seen behind the curtain, someone who knows that most people are actors in a script they didn't write. You stopped being the victim of your story and became the author. The irony is poetic. They thought you were gone, but you were only gathering strength in the shadows. And when you finally stepped back into the light, it wasn't to prove them wrong. It was to remind them you never needed their permission to rise. They thought the silence meant surrender, that when you disappeared, you were done. But silence was never your weakness. It was your weapon. You learned to let the noise eat itself alive while you built an empire inside your own head. They were loud, desperate to be seen. You became invisible and therefore untouchable. What they mocked as retreat was your metamorphosis. You shaved the skin of validation and walked straight into the realm of power, the kind that doesn't announce itself, it's just felt. You started moving differently, not chasing, not begging, not proving. Every step you took carried the weight of restraint. You understood something ancient, that true dominance isn't in control, it's in composure. You mastered the art of holding your fire until the air itself bends to your will. The same eyes that once looked down on you now hesitate to meet yours, because something about you has changed, not louder, not brighter, but heavier. You radiate a quiet threat, the kind only the broken can possess. Your enemies still talk, but their words fall flat now. Their voices sound like echoes in a room you no longer live in. They can't touch you because you've stopped existing in their game. You became a ghost they can't defeat, a memory that haunts their pride. You don't crave revenge. You embody it. Every calm breath you take is a reminder that you survived what should have destroyed you. You turned betrayal into blueprint, pain into architecture. Every scar became a design in the armor they'll never wear. You learned the discipline of kings, patience in chaos, strategy in silence. You no longer fight for validation. You orchestrate outcomes. When others rush to speak, you listen. When they act out of emotion, you move with precision. That's how you began to win, quietly, methodically, without permission. They still think it's luck, but deep down they feel it. The balance shifted. You became the one who writes the rules. Every small choice now ripples through their world like a silent earthquake. They can't celebrate your downfall anymore because it never arrives. You outgrew their reach. You evolved into something they can't categorize. Too calm for chaos, too dangerous for peace. They scroll through your life now, seething, pretending not to notice. But every glimpse burns them because you're everything they pretended to be. Focused, grounded, untouchable. You didn't win by playing harder. You won by changing the game entirely. And the irony, you never wanted to win their game in the first place. You were just trying to survive, to rebuild, to understand why pain chose you. But pain wasn't your punishment. It was your initiation. You became the storm they once mocked you for fearing. Now, when they see you, they go quiet, not out of respect, but realization. They finally understand you didn't rise to prove them wrong. You rose because you finally remembered who you were before they told you to forget. You don't announce your victory. You exist in it, quietly, like a shadow that outlasted the fire that tried to burn it. The noise that once mocked you has gone silent, not because it ran out of words, but because it finally realized it was never speaking to your level. You became untouchable not by force, but by understanding. You learned that real power doesn't roar, it observes. It waits. It moves only when it must. And now you move differently, not with arrogance, but with precision. Every step deliberate, every breath controlled. You've become something they can't categorize, a storm disguised as stillness. There was a time you begged to be seen. You'd trade your peace for approval, your truth for applause. But that version of you died quietly the day you stopped explaining yourself. The world didn't notice your rebirth because you didn't announce it. You just started acting like someone who already knew the outcome. You stopped chasing closure. You became it. And in that silence, something ancient stirred, something that has existed in every person who ever refused to kneel to chaos. The old self screamed, the new self whispered, and the whisper was louder. They still talk about you. Not out of admiration, but out of confusion. They can't comprehend how you endured what should have broken you, how you stood where others crawled, how you smiled when the knives were still in your back. That's what haunts them. That's what burns them alive in their sleep, the realization that they were part of your making. Every betrayal, every dismissal, every unseen wound became a brick in the fortress you now rule from. You didn't rise despite them. You rose because of them. They forged the very thing they feared most. Now you stand at the edge of everything they said you'd never reach. But there's no celebration, only silence like the calm before creation. You don't crave revenge. You've outgrown the need for witnesses. You understand now that destruction was just the first stage of design. You were meant to lose everything, to remember what cannot be taken. That's why your presence unnerves them. You're no longer driven by ego, but by purpose. You learn that control isn't about dominance, it's about detachment. You can't be manipulated by a world you no longer need. And that is your legacy, not fame, not recognition, but mastery. You've turned pain into a language only the wise can hear. You've become the embodiment of resilience disguised as restraint. When they see you now, they see a ghost of their own potential, a reflection of what they could have been had they not surrendered to weakness. You don't remind them of failure. You remind them of what's possible. You were never in their game, you were studying it. And while they fought for attention, you became the lesson. You didn't just win, you transcended. Now they whisper your name not in hatred but in awe, because deep down they know the truth. You were never competing, you were evolving, and evolution always wins.